We have some breaking news for you right now. President Trump has agreed tonight not to terminate NAFTA at this time after speaking with the President of Mexico and the Prime Minister of Canada. Let's discuss now. Fareed Zakaria is here. He's the host of CNN's Fareed Zakaria GPS. So Fareed, just getting this bulletin, it's out from CNN. Again, the highlight here, the headline is that Trump agrees not to terminate NAFTA at this time. He spoke with the Mexican president. He spoke with the Prime Minister of Canada. The statement said the leaders agreed to proceed swiftly according to their required internal procedures to enable the renegotiation of NAFTA deal to benefit all three countries. But just earlier today, we had guidance that he was going to sign some sort of agreement to get out of NAFTA on the 100-day mark of his presidency. So what is going on here?
But that was then. This is now. This is Donald Trump. Look, this is in some ways as head-spinning as so many of the reversals that Trump has undertaken. He was going to name China a currency manipulator. On day one, he said, didn't do it. He talked about how he was going to get much tougher on trade with the Europeans. Didn't do it. He talked about how NATO was obsolete, and he essentially seemed to be threatening to pull out of NATO. He didn't do it. Obamacare was going to be repealed. That hasn't happened. There's a whole series of these.
Funding for the wall.
There's no money for the wall. The NAFTA piece is actually stunning because this was a centerpiece of his, not just the campaign, but his worldview. Donald Trump's worldview is that America has been losing, and most importantly, it's been losing at trade. And NAFTA, if you recall, almost every campaign stop, he said NAFTA was the worst deal ever made. So what Donald Trump has now said, not 100 days into his presidency, that after having concluded for 10 years that this was the worst deal America ever made, he's going to keep it.
Does this, I mean, this is happening after the CNN ORC poll. I'm not sure if you saw the poll came out just over an hour ago. And his handling of the presidency, the approval rate is 44, the lowest since Eisenhower, since they started polling. All this flip-flopping playing into this, or at least the promises that he made on the campaign trail, and then he hasn't been able to keep them yet, because some of them I'm sure he will be able to keep. But he, on the campaign trail, he said within the first 100 days, or on the first day, I'm going to repeal and replace it, and I'm going to do this, and he hasn't been able to do it. That's showing up in his approval ratings and his handling of the country.
I would think so. I think what's showing up is a kind of general incompetence, right? There's a certain sense in which you said you were a smart businessman, that you alone could fix things, that you understood how to do all this, that everybody else were morons. And what I think you're seeing, which is pretty obvious to those of us who look at this carefully, is government is hard. Politics is hard. The reason some of these things don't get solved is because they're very hard. They involve competing interests. They involve adjudicating among those competing interests. It's not that they're all morons in Washington. And that Donald Trump coming in has not actually made it easy. In fact, he's done worse at just the simple task of filling his administration, for example. He's filled fewer high-level positions than any previous administration. At being able to construct an executive order that passes muster with courts, that is implemented by the bureaucracy.
About the travel ban.
That's
and all
right.
That. But his supporters continue to give him a lot of leeway because the support is in the 90s. I think it's almost like 98% of Republicans.
96% of the people who voted for him, but his approval rating among Republicans has actually slipped. It was about 86% a couple of weeks ago. It's dropped to about 80%. So watch that number, because once you see that number fall more, congressional Republicans will feel more emboldened to move away from.
I'm wondering how much longer it's going to continue. His supporters will continue to say, "Oh, no, this is fake news. This is not real." When there is everything that we have reported, there's teeth to it. It seems it's the reality. NAFTA, repeal and replace Obamacare. How much more of a honeymoon period? This is supposed to be his honeymoon period now. Is he going to have, even with his own supporters?
I think the key that I wonder about, and look, nobody knows. The support Donald Trump has is unique. It's unprecedented, and we should be careful about making any kind of predictions about it. But what I wonder about is, what is coming through is that Trump is governing as a pretty traditional Republican. The things he's trying to do and seems like he will be able to do are things like tax cuts, deregulation, corporate tax cuts, corporate deregulation, maybe the repeal of Obamacare. As far as I can tell, that's what the Freedom Caucus wants. That's what the Washington think tanks and the conservative movement wants. But it wasn't what his base wanted.
Yeah.
His base was a much more nationalist, protectionist, populist base. And Steve Bannon, who reflected that correctly, I think, identified what they want is a $1 trillion infrastructure bill. We're not even talking about that, right? And certainly, once you do this tax cut, which adds $4.5 trillion to the deficit, I don't think there's a ghost of a chance of even a modest infrastructure bill passing. So what happens to that populist movement that has been waiting to find some of these campaign promises fulfilled? And instead what they're finding is the Heritage Foundation and the American Enterprise Institute and all these economic right-wing movements, they're getting the payoff. Yeah. But they didn't elect Trump.
Yeah, can we talk about North Korea? Because yesterday, North Korea staged its largest ever military drill, and rising tensions in the region, in the U.S., raising tensions, I should say, in the U.S. Today, you saw the meeting where everyone was bussed over to the White House. What do you think of to talk about this North Korea threat? What's your reaction to what's going on here? Are you learning anything about this meeting today?
No, you're learning what Trump has been doing with a number of these issues, which is huffing and puffing without changing the policy. There's all this big drama around the policy of strategic patience is over. We're not going to take it anymore. We're warning you. We're putting you on notice. And it seems as though after all that, after this massive review, after summoning 100 senators, putting them on buses, basically it's the same policy as the Obama policy. In fact, Bob Corker, the Republican chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, was asked, so what was all this about? What is the new policy? And his response was, it was an okay meeting. What did you learn? What was new? And he said, like I said, it was an okay meeting.
Is this all about optics? Is this all about...
Well, there's a danger here. It is about optics. It's about seeming tough. And they've done it on Iran as well. You remember they said, we're putting Iran on notice. The danger is if you keep huffing and puffing and the policy seems the same, you're going to lose credibility with the next time when you really need to issue a threat. It's not going to be meaningful.
Let's talk about foreign policy within the first 100 days, because I said that, it's all coming down to the last 100 hours. That's my thing, right? Because they're trying to throw anything in there. Where are we on foreign policy in the first 100 days of this presidency?
It's pretty incompetent, honestly, and particularly surprising given that you had a very serious A-team for foreign policy, and one has to assume, therefore, it's the chaos in the White House. Because let's look at it. Usually presidents, first reach out and reassure our two closest countries, Canada and Mexico. Well, we've pissed both of them off.
Then this NAFTA thing helps.
It probably is in some ways mending that. Then you look at Europe, where the United States has always tried to be a pillar of helping Europe stay unified, stay coherent. Donald Trump has done something, I think, unprecedented. He has intervened in the middle of a French election on the side of the right-wing nationalist populist who wants a pro-Russian, anti-European, and frankly, anti-U.S. policy. I don't think any president has ever done something like that before. So there are many of these very awkward elements to the policy. In some places, I suppose the bottom line is there's been no major policy reversal. Again, after having promised to reverse policy on all kinds of things, mostly it's the Obama policy being pursued everywhere.
Fareed Zakaria, thank you very much. And again, this is our breaking news. The president has agreed not to terminate NAFTA, the North America Free Trade Agreement, at this time. Fareed Zakaria helping us out with the breaking news. Again, our thanks to Fareed.